let's have a look at what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. But I'm going to start with this appalling tweet from the British Ministry of Defence. I've just put a little bit of text to go with that, if we can pop that on the screen. So the fact is that Ukraine is losing the war at the moment. There's no question of this. But let's have a look at how the UK Ministry of Defence responds. I'm calling this hype and propaganda. Let's look at this dreadful clip that they've put out.
Загалом я студент Харківської академії дизайну.
My name is Sofia. I'm a combat medic in the Ukrainian army, and first of all, I'm a student. I'm still a student. I'm studying painting at the university, like different kind of painting and painting techniques. And when the full-scale invasion started, I joined the Ukrainian army, and now I'm serving in the Ukrainian army, and I'm going to do this until it ends. I will be in the army until it ends, it's for sure. So I like all these tactics and everything. I want to explore this, to understand more. But when the war ends, maybe I will do the thing I started doing before the war. I will restore pieces of art, and maybe I will restore everything which Russians destroyed during this war. It's my small dream.
So that young lady has a dream. Let's have a look at the battle into which she is going to go. She's been trained how to use a rifle. Let's see what she's really going to be up against. Now, I've got some video clips. I'm going to talk through this. This is Chasiv Yar, the suburbs. This is the next key city for the Russians because it's on high ground. And of course, what we're seeing in the picture, as always, is that it's the concrete-built high-rise buildings that form defensive positions for the forces. Ukrainians or the Russians to that effect, but you will see that the surrounding land is very flat. There's very little cover apart from the tree lines, and what is the result? The Russians are bombing the Ukrainians out of any defensive position. So rifles effectively useless in the first instance due to the heavy pressure of the Russian bombing. But if we look at the destruction here, it's massive, and then ultimately each one of these buildings has to be taken by foot soldiers on the ground. And if we look onto the horizon, we can see the the tree areas which form other defensive positions. So if we have a look in detail at the types of weapons being used, this shows the power of the Russian guided bombs, where they simply take out a building the moment they know what it's used for, and you can see the size of the explosion here. I'm going to suggest that young lady is one of many thousands of Ukrainians being trained to die because they're not being trained for the warfare that they're going to experience. The size of the bombs is absolutely massive, 500 kilograms, 1,000, 1,500, or even 3,000, and extremely accurate. If we move on to the next little clip, we start to well, let's leave this one running. This one, I think we're seeing thermobaric weapons being used, and these are absolutely targeted at Ukrainians in the tree lines. But we've got more here showing the accuracy of these weapons. And very often the Russians are targeting the bases of the Ukrainian drone operators. So they're not wasting a few shells, they're simply obliterating the whole building and infrastructure around it with these immensely powerful and very accurate weapons. When it comes to air defensives, the Russians are still putting out incredible equipment onto the battlefield. So we've got a picture here of the Tor system, which is coming into an open area where admittedly they are vulnerable and many have been taken out by the Ukrainians. But nevertheless, we're seeing weapon systems that the West, NATO in particular at the moment, is having trouble keeping up with for their speed and accuracy. And of course, we've now got the situation where the Russians are fully combat trained in their use. So this piece of footage claims that the missile was taking out a drone. I can't see a larger target, so I'm going to take that at face value. But what's also happening on the battlefield is the Russians are hunting for the Abrams tanks, and this is a film clip showing the destruction of one such tank. Let's let this one play. What are we going to see here? Well, the missile comes in and strikes the tank very hard in this particular image. The tank isn't fully destroyed. I think I said missile, I should have said drone. But what then happens is that this particular tank is tracked and it's followed and it's attacked multiple times until it is finally destroyed. And we can see here the effect of the final destruction. The tragedy is some of the men get out. You can see them moving to the right of your screen, but I believe at least one of the crew members didn't. And if it comes to anti-tank weapons, then the Russian Cornet is achieving remarkable success on the battlefield. Okay, this is a promotional film by the Russians themselves, but nevertheless, this shows the type of combat that's going on, where small numbers of vehicles are being used, and those are being attacked by drones and all these anti-tank guided weapons. And usually with a guided weapon, the destruction is complete, or with the crew or the soldiers who are traveling in the armored vehicle. This is another Abrams tank taking a hit, and of course this is completely removing the myth of the invincibility of Western weapons systems. And another picture of a destroyed vehicle here, which simply shows us that what we were told, that the Leopards and the Challengers and the Abraham tanks were going to win the war for Ukraine, simply not true. And as we speak, the Russians are making considerable progress on the battlefield, and the Ukrainians are having trouble re-establishing defensive lines. Now, I'll just put this on screen. This is part of a document that went to the US Committee of Congress, and in it it's saying that the American Excalibur precision artillery rounds initially had a 70% efficiency rate, hitting targets when first used in Ukraine. However, after a mere 6 weeks, efficiency declined to only 6% as the Russians adopted their electronic warfare system to counter it. So this is a very important statement, and it shows the reality on the battlefield, with the Ukrainians now under immense pressure because they're short of weapons and they're short of men. And on that topic, what is the Ukrainian response? Well, in this video, we will see how they're desperately trying to drag more men off the street. I don't know the location of this footage, but it's symptomatic in many of the eastern Ukrainian city urban areas where the squads are out in order to grab any young or indeed older man. And this clip here shows the sheer brutality of people being put into vehicles, taken away, given minimum training, and the reality is they're probably going to die on the battlefield. What does that death look like? Well, I'm not going to show you the pictures, they're too harrowing, but in the next clip, if we pop that on screen, we can see just the sheer scale of just one military cemetery in Ukraine. And of course, the scale of the Ukrainian casualties simply not talked about in the Western media, because we must believe the illusion that the Ukrainians are winning this terrible war as puppets of of NATO and the West. But the scale of this cemetery you can see for yourselves, and this is one of just many that are now there in Ukraine. Well, if we move on to Zelensky, he's been talking to the press, and if we just press the button on this one, play him in the background and have a look at the text we'll bring in. What is he saying? He's saying, really, trust me, Ukraine is going to fight to the last Ukrainian, and that last Ukrainian will be Zelensky. 2 armies have already gone. The third is falling apart on the battlefield at the moment. but he needs another 500,000 men. And he's also saying that his European friends are helping control his passport renewals to force Ukrainians out of hiding in European countries and back onto the battlefield, where they're almost certainly going to die. If we just, that's just an article from NBC News talking about the much needed conscripts. But if we go to this image from Handelsblad, short headline, but it says it all. Yes, dead, but with a new passport. And what this is getting at is that Ukrainians overseas are being forced to declare themselves because their passports are ineffective or they need renewing. And at that point, they're grabbed by the Ukrainian military. So if we just look at a bit more that's come from Zelensky himself, let's bring the text on screen. He's working hard, he says, with a peace summit in Switzerland. They're going to create a common understanding amongst the participating states with a view to achieving a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. But note, Russia is not invited. And he says we expect 80 to 100 countries to be able at least to try to, quote, force Russia to a fair peace. But the reality is at the moment that Russia has had no invitation. This is the formal report here from Switzerland, all you need to know about the Ukraine Peace Summit. I won't read it all, but it's busily quoting international law and the UN Charter, and it aims to create a common understanding of a framework favourable to this objective and a concrete roadmap for Russia's participation in the peace process. Here's The Guardian, and I throw this into the mix because it's very clear that the West sees that support for Ukraine is the same as support for Israel. Support for Israel is the same as Ukraine. But here's the journalist, Nathalie Tocker, and she is described as a Guardian Europe columnist. But if we get into the details, she's been to Oxford, she's been to London School of Economics, she's worked with the European University Policy Studies, the Transatlantic Academy, Washington, and the European Council of Foreign Relations. And she's also acted as a counsellor in international strategic matters for Federica Mogherini. So I'm suggesting this lady is not just an ordinary journalist, she's something rather more.